I'm Adam, I have a PhD in atmospheric physics, and I'm here to help you make sense of the changing planet we all share. And right now I am hot and I am bothered because Europe has been suffering through extreme heat like we've never seen before. And to make matters even more insufferable, there's currently a debate being waged about air conditioners. And I put debate in scare quotes deliberately because, as you'll see in just a moment, this is barely a debate. It's just a cynical attempt to turn an important issue into a culture war. And so let me say right at the top, we waste electricity and energy on all sorts of things that we don't want and we don't need, whether that's data centers or producing loads of crap that just gets thrown out after a single use. And so using electricity and energy on air conditioners, especially when they might be able to save lives, is something that I've not heard any climate scientist argue against. The question is, how do we do that as well as possible while also accepting what is at the root cause of this problem? And often this debate serves as a distraction from talking about the root cause. The root cause being climate change. Europe has seen truly exceptional heat. Records have been smashed, and they were smashed in June, which isn't even typically the hottest month of the year. Now it's around this time that I get comments saying things like, it's cold summer, as if this is just a normal season, even though records being smashed across the continent means that this is anything but normal. It's like seeing a jogger breaking records time and time and time again, and instead of asking whether that jogger might be doping, you just say it's called running. Anyway, I've spoken about that ridiculous climate denial talking point before on the channel. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe. But to highlight just how abnormal current temperatures have been, climate scientists estimated that the temperatures we saw in June would have been virtually impossible just a few decades ago. So what's changed? Well, our climate has changed. Or to put it more accurately, we have changed our climate. By burning fossil fuels and destroying nature, primarily by doing things like mass animal agriculture, we've massively heated the planet, and this has disproportionate effects on extreme temperatures. And this in turn has disproportionate effects on Europe, which is the continent heating faster than any other, at around 2 times the rate of the planet on average. And this isn't just a matter of people playing in fountains or eating ice cream, despite the images you might see accompanying heatwave stories in Europe. This is a matter of life and death. Multiple countries have already reported death tolls thousands in excess of what they typically would have been. Mortuaries in Paris had to turn away bodies because there was such a sudden influx. And the idea of our systems for the dead being unable to keep up with the heat really brings home just how severe what we're talking about is. But it's our other systems which are also struggling to adapt. We've seen public transport infrastructure failing, we've seen crops failing, and we've seen buildings which are struggling to keep cool and keep their inhabitants cool and safe. And that's where the air conditioner conversation comes in. Some right-wing politicians and pundits argue that the solution to all of this is both singular and obvious. Just shove air conditioners everywhere. And according to their logic, the only reason that continents like Europe haven't already done this is because of the resistance of evil climate scientists. I've even seen headlines referencing a European ban on air conditioners. And while I hate to get in the way of a good story, there is no such ban on air conditioners. So let me state again very clearly. Air conditioners are a valuable, potentially life-saving tool in the face of extreme temperatures. When temperatures get too high, our bodies can't cope and our organs overheat. This is especially important for the most vulnerable people, people with certain diseases, disabilities, the very old, very young. And for people in these kinds of situations, air conditioners can be absolutely vital. But the thing about the debate is, no one really disagrees with this. Now, sure, I've seen some general and not very helpful comments, some people calling air conditioners false solutions or discouraging their widespread adoption. But generally, when you peer behind these quotes or the misleading headlines about these bans on air conditioners, what you see is that people are actually saying that air conditioners need to be deployed more carefully and in tandem with a lot of other measures, which seems like quite a reasonable position. The thing is, air conditioners pump the heat outside, making the urban heat island effect even worse, and so making things even worse for the people who don't have air conditioners in the first place. And that's the other problem. Air conditioners aren't accessible to everyone, and often the most vulnerable people, for example, people living in poverty, are the least likely to be able to access them. Air conditioners can also place extraordinary demands on our electricity grid, which isn't just an inconvenience, it can actually make things go down, and that in turn can threaten lives. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't have air conditioners in Europe. Red tape isn't really the issue, and air conditioners are getting adopted more and more, especially in the south of Europe where it's hottest. But while it's baffling to people from other countries, like US Americans, where air conditioners are the norm, here in Europe there are several reasons why they're relatively difficult to adopt. Things like old housing where they can't easily just be shoved on, the fact loads of people here rent their homes. And then, of course, there's the fact that we still have ideas from yesterday's climate, which we haven't adapted to today's. A lot of old people don't understand that the heat we're seeing today isn't like the heat we saw before. And they don't understand that their bodies are especially vulnerable to the extreme conditions we're seeing. The climate has changed, and we need to adapt to those changes. And yes, that means building new infrastructure, and yes, that includes air conditioners and some other things I'm going to mention in just a minute. But it also means we need to adapt our ideas to protect ourselves as much as we can. I also want to emphasize that this isn't abstract. This is a conversation that I've been having with family and friends, especially elderly family and friends, time and time again, as they weigh up the pros and cons of installing air conditioners. I've even spoken to friends who say they've had full-on arguments with their parents who are insisting that they don't need air conditioners and they'll cope with the heat just fine. So yeah, this is a real issue as our ideas and our infrastructure struggle to keep up with the changing climate. But we can't just say, let's shove air conditioners on everything and think that that's job done. We need to do this carefully. We need to prioritize air conditioners in the places they'll save the most lives, especially for the old people, homes, hospitals, schools. We need to provide cooling centers for people who otherwise wouldn't have access to cool spaces. We need to educate, safeguard, and check in on the most vulnerable people. We need to plant trees so that our cities are kept as cool as possible, both indoors and out. We need to improve our buildings so that they can stay hot in winter and cool in summer, so-called passive heating and cooling. And we need to make sure that the air conditioners that we use are as efficient as possible. For example, by using heat pumps, which can use electricity to pump heat into buildings during the winter and out of the buildings in the summer. All of these steps have parts to play in protecting us from the new temperatures. And I'm not here to sell you one solution or another. In fact, I'm not here to sell you anything. I don't run product placements or even monetization on this channel because I don't want to sell you rubbish you don't need. If you're into that, you can keep me doing it by becoming a patron up here. But the thing about this culture war about air conditioners is that it's so incredibly cynical. It's just there to distract us. And that's not unique to Europe. Over in America, in New York, Mayor Mandami came under fire for suggesting New Yorkers workers keep their AC at 78 degrees Fahrenheit or around 26 degrees C. C stands for communism. Now look, maybe that is a little on the warm side, but the suggestion was so that the electricity grid wouldn't fail, which would genuinely threaten people's lives. But surprise, surprise, of course he came under fire from the right wing for suggesting something so incredibly outrageous. And look, whatever you hear pundits saying in this debate about air conditioning, the question isn't aircon or not. It's a question of aircon where we need it, as well as every single other thing we can do to keep ourselves cool and safe. And that has to include addressing the elephant in the room, the thing that this entire debate is meant to distract from: stopping climate change. I've seen articles about this great air conditioning debate which reference the fact that summers are getting increasingly hot, and failed to mention fossil fuels or even climate change a single time. The thing is, we're still destroying nature. We're still burning fossil fuels. And as long as we keep doing both those things, the world will keep getting hotter and extreme temperatures will become even more extreme and even more common. And politicians, especially on the right, are dragging their feet or actively resisting solving the problem, or even resisting acknowledging that there's a problem in the first place. Arguing about AC won't stop the world getting hotter. AC everywhere won't stop unprecedented, deadly temperatures for getting even more unprecedented and even more deadly. Yes, we need to talk about new ways to cope with the new heat, and I'd love to hear your personal favourite solutions for yourself or for your city or for your country. But we also need to talk about the ways we stop the new heat becoming normal and tomorrow's heat becoming even more unbearable. And thankfully, the world is starting to wake up to these problems and their solutions. And I've got a video about exactly that. Okay, until next time. Bye. Okay, I just recorded all of that without sound, and so this is take 2 now.